For this analysis, I'm going to kick things off just a little differently, and this time, you guys get to be involved. I'm going to show you different characters from various anime series. I'll leave their faces and names up just long enough for you to memorize them. Each of these characters share several traits with one another, but there's one big similarity that connects them all. I'll give you 30 seconds to point it out, starting now. Time's up. Now, if you guessed they're all the main protagonists of their respective series, that's correct, but not quite the answer I'm looking for. If you guessed they're the biggest crybabies in anime, then you're actually not that far off from the topic of today's video. However, if you were paying attention to the title of this video, then you already know the answer I was looking for is they're all children. At the time we're introduced to these characters, respectively, Shinji is 14, Usagi is also 14, Deku is 14 going on 15, Eren is 15, Kagome is 15, Ichigo is 12 going on 13, Naruto is 12 going on 13, Tanjiro is 13, Gon is 11, and Sakura is only 9 years old, making her the youngest out of everyone on the list. Now comes the part where I reveal I wasn't totally honest at the start of this video. While it's true they all share the common link of being children, there's also one more enormous trait that connects them. And similar to the commonality of these characters being children, it's a shared trait that often goes so grossly overlooked in the mediums of anime, manga, comics, video games, and so forth that it actually affects our cognition as the viewers on a psychological level, which in turn affects how we perceive these characters. I'm sure you're wondering, what similarities could Kagome possibly share with Naruto? In what way are Shinji, Sakura, and Eren similar? How could Ichigo, Usagi, and Tanjiro possibly be similar outside of being complete and total cinnamon rolls that deserve our eternal love and protection? Still not seeing it? The answer is each and every last one of these characters falls under the textbook definition of a child soldier. And whether or not we want to admit it, the evidence speaks for itself. Each character I've listed is either directly born into an already ongoing conflict, or born during periods of war, or they have their seemingly normal lives completely disrupted by outside forces beyond their control, and are either strongly encouraged, guilted, or outright forced to take place in an ongoing conflict or an entirely new one altogether. But Jax, I hear you say, your finger's already typing out a 6-paragraph comment essay for me to read later. Deku doesn't count. He and the rest of Class A willingly wanted to become heroes to help others. And while that need to help others is just one of many reasons we all love everyone of Class 1A, not you, Deku and the rest of Class 1A still count as child soldiers, especially if you consider the fact they live in a society that literally sets up government-funded institutions that encourage gifted children to join the ongoing war on crime, with said children seeing battle way before they are ready. Because My Hero Academia, like so many anime, manga, video games, comics, and more, is just one more example of a series where we see few capable adults. Moreover, the term child soldier doesn't extend to just those on the front lines of whatever conflicts happen to be going on. Child soldiers can also be used as messengers, human shields, recruiters, chefs, spies, used for sexual exploitation, you name it. Now that we've cleared that up, that brings me back to a point I'd made at the beginning of this video. As I mentioned earlier, these characters at some point during their respective character arcs either are or were labeled as crybabies by many people in the fandom. In fact, let's start with the character who literally ranks #1 on many top 10 lists of biggest crybabies in anime, Shinji Ikari from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Say it with me, everyone. Get in the robot, Shinji. Anyone who has ever watched, read, or heard of Neon Genesis Evangelion in some capacity is probably just as familiar with the endless memes of Shinji being told by his father Gendo to just shut up all the whining and get in the giant robot, as much as they are aware of the reason why Gendo stays tied with Shao Tucker for the award of literally the world's worst father. I don't know a single fan, myself included, who didn't get frustrated with Shinji's constant whining and crying. Like, damn, just shut up and save the world, Shinji. And really? It says a lot more about we, the audience, whether we watched or read Neon Genesis Evangelion as children or adults, that we had the audacity to get angry and frustrated with Shinji instead of, maybe trying to empathize with the fact that he is literally a traumatized 14-year-old child with deeply seated psychological scars stemming from a lifetime of abuse and abandonment, and oh yeah, he literally watched his mother die before his very eyes as a child. Now, put yourself in the shoes of that same 14-year-old child when your abusive father, who abandoned you right after your mother's death and left you alone with more unresolved sorrow, anger, hatred, and confusion at such a vulnerable age than any human being should be allowed to leave another with, suddenly calls you out of the blue some 10 years later and says he wants to see you. And not just see you, he wants to use you and risk your life to pilot the same eldritch horror called an Evangelion that you watched absorb your mother and ultimately destroy your life. And that's not all. The giant robot he wants you to just shut up and pilot is cybernetically linked to your own teenage body in a way that whatever pain or damage the Eva takes, whether it's losing an arm or literally literally being decapitated, your body experiences the same tenfold, which ultimately runs the risk of leaving you severely and permanently physically incapacitated, brain dead, or just dead. Oh, and P.S. if you don't get in the robot, your father will invalidate your entire existence in proximity to him and send you on a guilt trip from hell that plays on your justified desperation and unfulfilled need for his approval. That's kind of a lot to drop on an adult, much less a traumatized 14-year-old child. So why, when Shinji voices perfectly justified concerns and frustrations, were we so critical of Shinji for reacting to the situation exactly like a child should, when I know damn well none of us, despite what our inflated egos would lie and have us believe, wouldn't have been able to psychologically process the situation any differently? Let's shift the focus to another 14-year-old who is literally famous for being a notorious crybaby. Usagi Tsukino, better known as the pretty champion of love and justice, Sailor Moon. Even before she learned she was the reincarnation of the Moon Princess, as well as being the future Neo Queen Serenity, Usagi had already had her reputation of being a quote, bratty crybaby. Or, as I like to frame Usagi's behavior without the distorted filter of toxic masculinity, misogyny, and how society doesn't teach us to express and regulate emotions in a healthy manner, acting like a normal teenager. Usagi getting easily upset is one of the most long-running gags of the series, and is more than not played for laughs in order to show the difference in maturity between her past self as Princess Serenity and her current self as an average 14-year-old schoolgirl. And as the audience, we kind of just laugh along and think, yeah, stop being such a crybaby, save the world already. All the while thinking how any one of us would love to switch places with her or any of the Sailor Scouts. We'd love to have the great powers, amazing outfits, dope weapons, and the hot college-aged boyfriend who would definitely be having a seat with Chris Hansen in our timeline. That is, until you remember all of the psychological and physical pushback that comes with being a 14-year-old girl just told by a talking cat that not only is she the reincarnation of some moon princess who, by the way, died quite tragically in her past life, but now has to save the world multiple times, usually on a daily basis, while also being put on a crash course with keeping fate in line so that the world doesn't fall into ruin 50 times over, so she can become the greater version of her future self and ensure the survival of an entire kingdom not of this planet, which of course comes with the knowledge that each time Usagi fails to prevent this, she gets to watch her loved ones die tragically time and time again, including her best friends, her future child, and her future husband. All of this on the shoulders of a 14-year-old child who is just suddenly expected not to be and act like a teenager anymore because she and the other scouts have this great responsibility to bear that comes with being a soldier. And if you think I'm stretching it, in Japanese, the Sailor Scouts are literally called Sailor Senshi, which literally translates to warrior. But okay, fine, let's shift the focus away from world-saving situations and focus more on how these children handle interpersonal matters such as personal relationships. I will go fully on record as saying that Kagome doesn't get enough credit for being one of the strongest lead female characters of the last 2 decades or more. I can already hear y'all going in on me on the comment section, but just hear me out for 1 second. Kagome is a 15-year-old child that was physically and literally yanked backwards by a demon 500 years in the feudal era, all the while discovering she possesses an incredible spiritual power of which she has no knowledge of how to summon, use, or control. When she first gets there, and after being attacked and captured by men that clearly mean her harm, she's interrogated, released, and told that her hometown doesn't exist. She then meets the half-demon Inuyasha, who, after genuinely trying to kill her, she's forced to work with to recover the shards of a jewel that was literally ripped from her body and then shattered. Over the course of the series, Kagome is thrown in all of these wild situations, and she really tries her best to adapt, all the while balancing her time-hopping adventures while trying to graduate middle school and later high school and trying to master her newfound powers. But as many fans who stuck with Inuyasha truly know, one facet of Kagome's major character growth and one of the biggest focal narratives of the entire series is her chaotic relationship with her future husband, Inuyasha. Now, let's take a moment to stop right here and really put Kagome's situation into perspective. She is, I say again, a 15-year-old girl who is not only dealing with a massive amount of mind-bending changes in her life, but is also on the verge of experiencing her first true romantic feelings for the first time in her life. Now, imagine being in love for the first time. Hell, just imagine being in love. Now imagine that the person you are deeply in love with, enough to risk your life multiple times for, can't resolve their feelings for you because you literally have the face of their ex who not only died violently, but that they're still deeply in love with, and just looking at you causes them immense psychological and physical pain. Oh, but it gets better. That dead ex that you're identical to, yeah, totally comes back to life. And when they aren't spending their time trying to drag your beloved to hell with them, they're either trying to kill you or they're spending their time telling you that you'll never be good enough for the person you love no matter what you do, and the fact that the one you love constantly leaves you in dangerous situations to be with said ex should be proof enough of that. Suddenly you're buried in all of these insecurities about not being good enough, not being attractive enough, not being strong enough, not being useful enough, not being able to love them the way their ex did. Now imagine you are a 15-year-old child with all of that weight on your shoulder. And yet, time and time again, we as the audience expected Kagome, a 15-year-old child with more issues than Time magazine, to just deal with a messy situation like that. And you know what? Kagome did just that. Meanwhile, we all know grown-ass adult fans of the show who who were in toxic ass relationships who couldn't even begin to cope with Kagome's situation, much less speak on how Kagome should have handled things. So, with all of that out of the way, what is it that makes us, the audience as a collective whole, act as if we forget that these children in these stories are just that, children? What is it that gives us this sense of superiority that leads us to judge how these child characters should react to these quote-unquote adult situations? Well, one possible explanation is that in a lot of the media we consume, be it anime, manga, video games, comics, or any form of entertainment where young children are often the protagonists, is that the lines between what is perceived by society as childish compared to what is considered adult are often very, very, very blurred. More than not, these child characters we see are often forced to grow up, usually in relation to the outside circumstances that surround and shape them, such as a lack of strong, mature, responsible adult influences in their lives in order to meet and match not just their perception of what an adult is, but society's own perceptions and expectations as a whole. This especially extends to all facets of a child character's growth, particularly in proximity to their physical, psychological, emotional, and yes, sexual development, which is why a lot of the anime, manga, comics, and media we consume tends to focus on those particular aspects of a child character's growth. Speaking from both very personal experience as well as countless studies of child development in relation to functionality as an adult, when a child is forced to grow up, that means we also see a major expedited shift in those specific areas of development. Meaning, a child forced to grow up too young is going to try and begin to adapt a more adult way of thinking and behaving in order to adjust and survive to these so-called adult situations they find themselves in. And sadly, this clash in cognition and perception is only further enhanced and perpetuated by the adults, or lack thereof, in a child character's narrative. You can see perfect examples of this conundrum and how it's handled in multiple noir titles, including Space Pop, Arms of the Dragon, and other noir series now available to read at www.noirseries.com. That finally brings us to where we can begin to recognize the disconnect between child characters placed in these mature situations and how these child characters react in these situations compared to our own reaction of their reaction to their situation. While there's so many factors here at play, it more or less boils down to an overall lack of empathy for these characters. Perhaps the same type of empathy we, the audience and viewers, not only lack, but perhaps were never fully able to cultivate properly for whatever reason, whether it was just how we were brought up or because of how society tends to view the concept of empathy as a negative, when really being able to truly empathize with a character, i.e. being able to break down and analyze their struggles, what makes them tick, and why they are the way they are, is one of the founding cornerstones of what makes a character effectively relatable, whether or not you want to admit to the reasons why you relate to them in the first place. What makes a character relatable is their realism in proximity to their joy, their sorrow, their overall growth, and what makes them the characters we've all come to love so much and will continue to be loved and examined for decades to come. To sum everything up, I know it can be difficult not to get frustrated with a character, whether they are a child or an adult. Believe me, we've all been there. However, next time you find yourself screaming at a character, particularly a child one, for not acting how you would personally handle the situation, take a moment to pause and reflect upon the why that drives that character and the circumstances they're in. It's a short jump from how we react to a fictional character's circumstances to how we would react to the circumstances of a flesh and blood person. A little empathy always goes a long way.